Hey guys, Bored Now back with you again, and this is gonna be the penultimate part of my countdown of my top 50 science fiction movies, my top 50 personal favourites. So on this video I'm into the top 20. I'm gonna be doing 20 to 11, so very excited to be bringing this to you. You can find the other three parts so far up on the channel, and I'll put a link to those in the description as well. But please get involved, please get in touch in the comments and let me know some of your favourite sci-fi movies, and also comments on some of my picks on this video. If you want to be so bold and do a top 50, then go ahead, put them in the comments, or a top 20 or whatever. Just name some of your favourites. So I'm going to get started, and of course start with the number 20. And the number 20 might surprise some people. You know, it's sort of held as a sci-fi classic, which many would have much higher than 20. For some it would be their number one, I'm sure. But I've gone with Blade Runner, and to be precise, Blade Runner The Final Cut. So the original film, of course, came out in 1982, and then you've had the director's cut and the final cut, which came out in 2007. So that's the version I've gone with. I think for a lot of people, for most people, the director's cut and then the final cut did improve on the theatrical release, which came out originally, because it does away with that needless voiceover from Deckard, and also it does away with that kind of pointless happy ending, whereas the ending which we get here is much more satisfying. It's much more ambiguous and sort of powerful, and it just makes sense for the movie. It's a much stronger ending. In fact, the ending is one of the best things about the movie, I think. Now, obviously, I still really like this movie because it's in my top 20. I think any film that appears in the top 20 is going to be a movie I really enjoy. But I'll be honest with you, I do find Blade Runner overrated. I think a lot of the appeal is to do with the style, which is absolutely breathtaking. You know, the depth of the visuals and the whole set design and special effects. I think the look of it was obviously ahead of its time. It's influenced a lot of different movies. And the music is really great as well. Really stunning. Really sort of gets you into it, as I hope you cannot hear my dog too much going crazy in the background. You've got the noirist sort of cyberpunk feel, which has been used in so many films since. And it's an intriguing premise. You know, there's interesting themes in there. You've got a strong cast, although I don't think all of them are used to the best of their abilities. But, you know, Harrison Ford is well cast as Deckard, and probably the star of the movie from the cast is the late Rutger Hauer, who's just fantastic as he's the villain of the piece, although there is more complexity to his character as you move along. And his line at the end about, you know, I've seen things which you wouldn't believe, is, I think, one of cinema's most iconic lines. But where it's overrated, I think, is in the story. I think parts of the story leave me uncold, I almost said uncold, that's an odd phrase. Parts of the story leave me cold, and I don't really engage in the relationship with Deckard and Rachel. I know for some they sort of find that sexist, that relationship, because I think he has all the power and kind of the way he treats her. I think that's, to be fair, that's kind of to do with the noir traditions it's kind of playing with. But even so, it's not a relationship I really get into, and I can understand people who find it a bit sexist. And I actually don't think the story is that good. I think bits of it are quite plodding and like not predictable, but kind of repetitive. Some of the scenes I think could be cut down, and it's actually not really a very long movie. The length is kind of, I'd say the length is about right, but there are definitely scenes that drag a little bit and just leave me a bit cold. So the story I find overrated. I think it's more to do with the themes and some of the ideas. And I mean, obviously, if it lived up to those ideas for me, it would be right up there. It would be one of the best sci-fi movies ever. Maybe one of the best movies ever. But, credit to Ridley Scott. I mean, this is obviously the sort of thing he does best. He's a creator of worlds, and the world he creates in this is unforgettable. There's some interesting themes. I mean, another criticism I would have of it is that I do think some of the styles in it, they do look a bit ridiculous. I know he was inspired by the pop music of the time. But for example, I think the Daryl Hannah character, who kind of looks like a Susie and the Pansies knockoff, I think that just looks kind of silly. And there's also that kind of Alice in Wonderland type look and sub sort of theme going on, and that's just too cheesy. That moment is just too on the nose. So it has problems, but I guess for the mood and the style, and you've got a strong cast, and there are ideas in there. I think, as I said, the ending is great. The ending might be one of the best endings of any film. So that stuff does elevate it a lot, and it makes it at least a 7 or even an 8 out of 10. Obviously, this version is improved from the original theatrical, but so I'd say if you have to see a version, then, well, you should see Blade Runner at least once. But you either see the final cut or the director's cut. I don't think you need to bother with the theatrical cut. But anyway, yeah, it's a good film, but I don't think it's a great film, in my opinion. So Blade Runner, the final cut, is my number 20. Number 19, a much more fun film, and yes, I'm going to say it. It's Ghostbusters, baby. Ghostbusters, sorry, it's better than Blade Runner. Live with it, people. And that might become a running gag as I run down the list, as I say, yes, this is better than Blade Runner. But yeah, Ghostbusters, it's a classic, folks. It's absolutely brilliant. It's timeless. Great characters, great casting. I think the chemistry between certainly 3 of the 4 leads is there because they, of course, they came up together on the comedy circuit and worked together on Saturday Night Live. I think it's one of the first movies to really tap into that, harness that sort of energy. It's also significant that Harold Ramis directs he doesn't direct the film, but him and Dan Aykroyd did the script. Ivan Reitman directs the film. So I think the fact that they work on this, him and Aykroyd, Ramis that is, did the script, credit to them. It's a really good script, but they obviously knew Murray well. And you believe in these 3 guys. I mean, obviously Winston's introduced later in the film, and he's great as well. Ernie Hudson really adds something a bit different to the group as well. But you really believe then the Venkman, the Stantz, and the Spangler, then they are college best friends. You believe in that bond, that relationship. And the reason the movie really works is then they all add something a bit different to the group, and that includes Winston when he joins later on. They all have their own feel. So they stand out, the characters stand out, you believe in them as a group, but you enjoy them individually as well. Obviously, this is classic Bill Murray's, he's that like smooth ladies man. Obviously, at the beginning, you get that scene with the electric shocks, and he's very sleazy in it, but he's very entertaining as well. He's just so charismatic and likable. And that's one of the things about Murray in these like classic comedies, is you really love him despite the fact he's playing quite a roguish sort of naughty like figure. um and I think it's one of the best feel good movies ever. I mean, the ending and the whole build up to the ending is one of my favorite endings of any movies ever. I just love like the camaraderie between the characters and the fans on the streets. Ghostbusters, it's just brilliant. It just stirs my blood every time. I love this town. A fantastic line from Ernie Hudson as you go into the end. And the effects for the time actually hold up pretty well. Some of them look a bit cheesy now and a bit dated, but they get away with it because I think it is meant to be prestige in like kind of old like B type movies, so it's not really a big problem. But you can't go wrong with Ghostbusters. Every time I stick it on, it just brings a smile to my face. It's so delightful. Sigourney Weaver again, really great as the love interest for Vankman. You really believe in their relationship. Great music, kick-ass theme, but really the whole soundtrack. I think obviously a lot of people remember the Ghostbusters theme, but they forget there's a lot of good music on the soundtrack. I recommend, you can probably pick it up quite cheaply, but the Ghostbusters soundtrack is just kick-ass. I recommend it, and I recommend the film, the original Ghostbusters from 1984. My number 18, something much more art house now, and it is The Man Who Fell to Earth from 1976. So this is a cult classic from the late Nicholas Roeg. It's based on Walter Travis's novel of the same name, and it of course stars David Bowie in his most iconic, unforgettable screen role, the role he was born to play as the lead character. And he is, of course, an alien who appears in human form, who comes to Earth looking for water to take back to his home planet. There's a drought on his home planet. And throughout the film, we see kind of flashbacks, images of his family back home. And there's a subplot where he uses technology and gets in like with this tech company. He's like the head of this tech company, so you can tell there's a lot of satire in there, a lot of themes, and ultimately there's this really bizarre but beautiful love story between him and the Candy Clark character, who's a girl he meets at this motel, which is the motel he's staying at because that's where he crash lands in New Mexico, and the New Mexico landscape just looks beautiful. But that relationship really gives the film its heart. It's really a tender, beautiful relationship. She's very good as Mary Lou. And it's a film which has grown over time. It wasn't really that well liked at the time, but over time it has got more appreciation and really deserves it. It's a very unique cult film, very trippy, very psychedelic, really character driven, but obviously with fascinating themes. And it stands out as just being a very different kind of sci-fi, and it does have a heart. Like at times it really is heartbreaking. It's not just this kind of cold, satire and like exploring all these different themes, and it's not just like this kind of artsy, indie type film. It does have a heart as well. It does, like that relationship does sort of hook you in. But yeah, beautiful film, one of Nicholas Roeg's best ever films. So that's The Man Who Fell to Earth. And I also saw, actually, just quickly, the 2016 stage sequel, Lazarus, which some of you might know David Bowie was working on, like, up to his death, so he was involved heavily, and that's kind of the last thing he was involved with, I think, was that stage production. It was a sequel, as I said. So kind of fit in, and Michael C. Hall was there in the lead role, so he was kind of playing the Bowie-esque character. He's really good in it. But what they do is they use Bowie songs for the musical and kind of put like these new spin on the classic Bowie songs. But yeah, it came out in 2016. I saw it that year in London, and I thought it was really great, really beautiful. I know it's toured since, depending on what version you see of it. I know some people haven't quite been into it, but I thought it was good. I liked it, Yeah. So who knows? It might still be shown somewhere. But that was Lazarus, which was like a sequel to The Man Who Fell to Earth, but a stage musical. But yeah, Man Who Fell to Earth is my number 18. Number 17, we're back to Star Trek, and my second Star Trek movie of the list. So I had The Voyage Home a couple of episodes ago, and now I've gone with Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan from 1982. I think for many this is the best Star Trek movie, and I'm certainly not going to argue with that. So it's everything you want from a classic Trek adventure, and a good example, I think, of how to do a great sequel. I think one of the things lacking from the first Star Trek movie, Star Trek the Motion Picture, was a good villain. But that problem's solved here with Ricardo Montalban, a really great as the title character. And obviously it's a unique example because he was in an episode from the original series, so they actually brought him back. So there's kind of continuity there. And he's this really camp presence as Khan, but he also has this sly, sinister presence, very like reptilian. Impressive. He really delivers the line with a lot of bite and menace. Now his fashion sense is absolutely scary, so that would terrify you alone. But what the hey, it's all part of the camp fun. He's brilliant in it. And it's just a really cool character-driven piece. The film is very knowing, it's very witty and fun. You've got really cool retro sets, impressive action and effects that still hold up pretty well today. I got the Blu-ray quite recently, and it really looks quite good, and it's a lot of fun. And I think, again, as I was talking with Ghostbusters, even the cheesy elements, they just work as part of the charm of the film. But I think crucially, as with all the best Trek movies, they cut down on the melodrama. It's focused on the mission and those characters. So I think with a lot of great sci-fi, again, like I said with Ghostbusters, but particularly space adventure movies, it's so much about the family. It's so much about the crew and how they interact and their bond to each other. In a way, like, these sorts of things become like an extended family. So that's kind of the beauty. That's how you get into them. And of course, it has one of the great stings in the tail of any Star Trek movie involving a certain main crew member at the end. I think, yeah, that surprise ending really adds something a whole different. No one going into that film when it came out in 82 would have expected that ending. And I'm not going to say it because it is a spoiler. Chances are you all know, especially if you've seen the title of Star Trek 3, but I won't spoil it just in case no one watching this video knows. And one day I'll review the Star Trek films anyway, but wow, what a sting in the tail. I think the only slight complaint I have is maybe then James Horner's music probably doesn't live up to Jerry Goldsmith's fantastic score from the first film. It's still good music, but it's not half as good. Goldsmith's music from the motion picture is just fantastic. I've got the soundtrack, and it's probably one of the best soundtracks you could have, but hey, that's a small complaint. Besides that, enjoy the ride. It's everything you want from a classic Trek movie. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is my number 17. My number 16, and another great James Cameron sequel, it is Terminator 2: Judgment Day from 1991. So Aliens was in the last part, and this is another great example of him doing a great sequel. This time, of course, he did the original Terminator as well. And he does a wonderful job of expanding on that. It's a brilliant film. It expands on the themes. It feels different in its own way from the original Terminator. And I think just casting Arnie, but as the good Terminator, and just flipping his role around from the first film is a work of genius. And what they do with it, like the slow bond he forms with the Edward Furlong character over the course of the movie, and the ending, the payoff to that is really, really touching. And then you have Robert Patrick, who's like a chilling presence as Terminator, the evil Terminator. But really what you have to talk about is this is even more of a full-on action movie as the first one, and it's kind of all the better for that, because one thing James Cameron does best is action. There's some really grueling set pieces. The scene on the chopper, the motorbike chase and shootout near the beginning of the film. I think it goes on for like 7 minutes or so. It goes on for a while, but it's absolutely gripping. It hooks you in. It's so immersive. I mean, Cameron has his faults, and I'm maybe not his biggest fan, but scenes like that, he just are amazing. They just pull you in. He is a visionary director, no doubt about it. And I think the other thing he does is that he's just ahead of the game on technology. So we've seen that with him developing the 3D technology for Avatar. And in this, his effects are ahead of the time. That liquid shape-shifting effect he does for the Patrick Terminator. They just look amazing. And you have to remember, this is 1991. This is a long time before you would typically see effects that are that good in movies, in mainstream movies. And often, a lot of effects now are really, really poor. They look too, like, sort of manufactured, too. It's almost like they're too good, so they take you out of the film. They leave nothing for the imagination. But yeah, it's a jaw-dropping film. The effects are amazing. I do find it a bit overrated. I mean, obviously, I won't give away if the other Terminator will appear, but I think the plot maybe isn't as good as the original. I think the plot, maybe if anything, there's a bit too much going on. It feels a little bit baggy. Now, I don't think Cameron is the best writer, so I think that may be where the problem is. But considering all the good it does and how it advances on the original, that's probably a small complaint. So Terminator 2: Judgment Day is my number 16. My number 15, this might surprise some, but I've gone with Serenity. And Serenity, the Joss Whedon film from 2005, not that terrible Serenity with Matthew McConaughey, which came out last year. No, this is the Whedon film, his space adventure, his space western, which is basically the follow-on film, but also the concluding story to his great series Firefly. which cruelly only got one season. It was cancelled at the end of that season. So heartbreaking, because the first season of Firefly is maybe one of the best things you'll see on TV. You could tell with that first season there was the potential for more. There was potential for 3 or 4 seasons at least. It's one of the crimes that we didn't get it. So going into this film, and Whedon, who writes and directs, had a very tricky job, because he had to appeal to the core fan base. He had to give them like a satisfying conclusion to the story, but at the same time he had to make it work for people who had never seen the series, and he does that brilliantly. The film nails it, basically, considering the task it had, and that's part of the reason it's so high, because the task was so steep. But he does it beautifully. It's a film full of heart. You've got the great characters, again, this army of characters, this family of characters that you obviously got on the show. I mean, in this case, what he does is he kind of retcons the story a little bit and goes back, and it starts at a logical point, so that the film works as like a story in its own right. But there are still nods to the TV shows. You recognise the characters from the TV show. And yeah, it's full of emotion, full of heart. You've got the fun, offbeat, classic Whedon comedy and lines. Obviously, at this point, the characters, or the actors, the characters fit them like gloves. Great chemistry, lots of humour. It's beautiful to look at. It's an epic space adventure. But crucially, it does have dark moments along the way. There are surprises in this film. I think one of the things Whedon does best in his TV shows, and obviously in this film too, is he's not afraid to go to dark places. He's not afraid to put big characters at risk. And I won't give away spoilers, but yeah, there are some unexpected twists and turns to this film. It's an awesome film, and I think as far as maybe a film based on a TV show, or certainly one that has spun off from a TV show, I think it may be the best ever. I might struggle to think of a better example. He does an outstanding job. And I think what's notable is maybe because the TV show is like almost 20 years ago now. So, it's how things have come full circle and is now different with film and TV. But for the film, Whedon got much more of a budget than he did for the TV show, and that shows, and it really pays off. It really, the effects and that are really beautiful. So it is great to see what Whedon can do on the big screen with a budget. It's not to belittle the TV show, because that's fantastic, the writing, the characters, and it works as like a lot of individual adventure episodes. And I'm not going to compare them, because it's difficult when there's only one season compared with a movie. And for some, the movie didn't quite capture what the TV show did, but I thought it did a pretty damn great job. So that's Serenity, my number 15. So I recommend, if you've not seen Firefly, watch that first and then watch Serenity afterwards. Great sort of double bill, if you like. But Serenity is 15. My number 14, another game changer in the sci-fi genre, is The Matrix, which is over 20 years old now. Amazing. It redefined the game as a smart and beautiful looking sci-fi blockbuster. Of course, it's got that cyberpunk futuristic type feel, but it really runs with that, really does something quite different. Keanu Reeves is perfectly cast as like the Zen nerd who is responsible for saving the world. He's just breathtaking as Neo. His physicality is impressive. I think that's one of the things that appeals about Keanu Reeves, is the fact that he is a great physical action star. He really bulks himself up for the role. He's really committed. He does his own stunts in this, impressive moments like him running up walls backwards, flipping over and landing on his feet. He really did his own stunts. And it's the sort of thing he does now in like the John Wick movies, where it goes back to like the silent era of cinema. It goes to the fact he's telling a story using his body movements, and he just looks the part. He's absolute badass in it. He looks cool. And it's a fascinating story, some great ideas, a real sort of calling card for the Wachowski brothers, now the Wachowski sisters, of course. And I recommend actually their previous film, Bound, this neo-noir with Jennifer Tilly, Gina Gershon. That's very underrated. That's the film they did before The Matrix, which didn't get nearly enough fanfare, I think. But yeah, The Matrix just took them to a whole new level. It's breathtaking. You've got a great supporting cast: Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss. They add further depth. It's kind of the film depth, I should say. I think I said depth, which is weird, but I think it's the film that really got Carrie-Anne Moss to a whole new audience as well. She's amazing. She's in Memento and a bunch of other things, but good supporting cast. But yeah, just this rich visual style, unique like use of colours and locations, and just a great like philosophy at the heart of the film. Exploring on this idea that the world we live in, the everyday world, is actually the fake world, and the Matrix is like the reality. Just really ambitious and fascinating, and I think it holds up really well. It builds this unique sort of world on screen, and really the sequels were not needed. I think this is a classic example of a movie which was always meant to be a standalone, and then I think because it did so well at the box office, I think the Wachowskis were pressured into making more movies, and that turned out to be a mistake. But what the hey, the original still holds up. I think it is a sci-fi classic. Keanu Reeves has rarely been better, and the Wachowskis, except maybe Bound, which I personally fly the flag for, but yeah, they've not really been better either. So The Matrix, my number 14. My number 13, it's funny, I was just mentioning the silent era because I'm going all the way back to the silent era now. And we have the Fritz Lang silent classic Metropolis, 1927. So this is an absolute odyssey of a film. It's part of the German Expressionism movement, which is very interesting, like post-World War movement. And it's one of the most influential films ever, I think, full stop. It influenced Star Wars when you think about the design of the robot for C-3PO. It influenced Blade Runner. It influenced something more camp and adventurous like the Flash Gordon movie, for example. And it feels like a Hollywood epic, but before Hollywood epics, it like really existed. It's multi-layered storytelling. It pushes the boundaries of storytelling, so you have it's split up into different acts, almost like a play. The set design is just amazing. You get outrageous, eye-catching costumes. Again, ahead of their time. The fact he was doing this in 1927 is really remarkable. And the themes to do with industry and modernism, it's all there on the screen. The way these cities and the world sort of looks. You've got a bit of everything. It's high melodrama, it's camp, it's visually stunning, it's intriguing plot. You've got like a romance at the heart of it too. It's a really mind-blowing and draining film, which in a way should be a shambles. I mean, as you're watching it, it's kind of like, this is a long film, and is it doing too much? Is there too much in it? It feels like it should be a shambles, but somehow it just holds together and it keeps you engrossed. It somehow works, and I think when a film somehow works and maybe shouldn't, it makes it all the more impressive. Now, this is another one similar to Blade Runner. I think a lot of people would have this much higher. I've only seen it once, so that's one of the reasons. I think its inference is so great, then that puts it up quite high. But I think, again, this is a personal list, so some of the films I'm putting ahead of it, it's just for personal reasons. I mean, I can understand Metropolis then it probably is a masterpiece, and it probably is, if you were like picking them apart, it probably is better than some of those other films. But I've only seen it once, and for me, the other films grab me a bit more personally. But Metropolis is a tremendous film. I recommend seeing it. It's quite an experience. So Metropolis from 1927 is my number 13. My number 12, and I did say at the start of this list that trilogies do count because, of course, it's a whole story over 3 films. And it's the first example of that because my number 12 is the Planet of the Apes trilogy, the original trilogy. So 2012, 2014, 2017. The series which just proved then you can add to the original series but also improve on them. It's this great like modernized version of the Apes movie which still has certain like connection to the original films, but it takes it on to a whole new level. It really improves them. I think, you can argue the original Planet of the Apes was a very good film, but arguably as a trilogy, this is much more consistent than those original movies. Obviously, the effects are top of the range. You've got Andy Serkis doing amazing motion capture work. And that is an acting performance. I think that should have been recognised at the Oscars, as should the visual effects. But, you've just got these fascinating modern themes. But what's impressive is just the craft of the movies. The pacing and the storytelling, the characters, the kind of... You get some great actors over the course of the 3 movies. It kind of feels similar to what Nolan did with the Batman movies, where they feel like art house character driven movies that just have to happen to be in a big like Hollywood sort of franchise. And I'm gonna pick out the middle film, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, particularly, that's came out in 2014, because for me, Rise, the first film, is the weakest film. I know some people would argue. I think it is. I think there's a couple of things that let it down a bit, but it's still a very good movie. It's one of those franchises where even the weakest movie is still a really good film. So it's not like the weakest movie is a terrible movie. It's still a good movie. And then you get a fantastic emotional high and payoff in the final film, War of the Planet of the Apes. But I will mention Dawn because I think that is the best of the franchise. And that kind of goes to what I'm saying, because I saw it at the cinema, as I saw all of them at the cinema. And it's just one of the most emotional, vivid cinema experiences I've had maybe ever, because it made me cry. I was crying at a Planet of the Apes movie. I was so engrossed in the drama and so moved. And that's a great example. That's a really subtle, slow-moving character piece. You still get satisfying action and effects and all the rest of it. It looks fantastic, but that's a really subtle, moving film. Great characters, great casting. Kerry Russell from The Americans and various other things. who's a really underrated actress. She's great in it. You've got Jason Clarke in one of his better roles. I think he's a good actor. He's just been in a lot of bad movies, but he's really great in that. You've got Gary Oldman perfectly cast as like the villain of the piece, the main sort of human villain. And again, does tremendous things with the Apes movies. But yeah, such a memorable cinema going experience. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is amazing. I think it might be a masterpiece, but overall, the trilogy, sort of topping it all up, I think is a masterpiece. It's a staggering piece of cinema. I look forward to rewatching all three movies. So the Planet of the Apes trilogy, the new films, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Dawn, and War. My number 12. Just tremendous. If you've not seen them, go and check them out. And my number 11, the last part of this video, it is RoboCop. And again, I'll remind you, it's the original. Just so there's no confusion. There's been a couple of sequels. There's been a reboot more recently, which didn't quite take off. But RoboCop from 1987. So it's another appearance from Dutch director Paul Van Hoven. I had him with Total Recall, much lower down. I think it was like 40 or something. But clearly he's got a touch for sci-fi films. This is probably his best Hollywood film, I think. It's brutal, it's uncompromising, it's nihilistic. It just has this sharply like satirical like vision of the future in terms of crime and technology and the media. It really nails like the future of like cable television and 24-hour news reporting and the way that was going to go. It really nails that. It's bang on with that. And the violence of the film is really hard hitting. It's a very dark film. I think now, because RoboCop, the character, has this kind of more sort of cool, badass, sort of quirky feel, I think some of the comedy moments stand out more, especially from the sequels. But people forget that original film is actually really dark and brutal. But it's one where the violence does count. There's sort of something quite over the top about the violence. But that's the point. I think it is like this morality on violence as well. So that's really crucial. And I think it does that good balancing act, a bit like Total Recall, where it works as like an exciting drama film, but it's also, it has these serious themes in it as well. It gets a good balance, and it does have a heart. I mean, Peter Weller is the ultimate RoboCop, except no substitutions. Forget about the imposters which have come since, and his relationship with Nancy Allen's Lewis is really touching. I really like their bond in the film. There's a great cast of supporting characters, including the late Twin Peaks actor Miguel Ferreira. He's at his sleazy best in it. Really good cast, top to bottom. It's a unique film. It was ahead of its time, which so much great sci-fi is. And that theme music always gets the blood pumping. And again, it's sort of, there's a link on my list because I have had quite a few blockbusters, but they're older blockbusters. They again show you that Hollywood can do this, or they have done it, where they've given you a really good blockbuster with brains. It's still satisfying. It's still, as a mainstream film, it's still got the moments you want from a mainstream film, but it also has hearts. It has smarts. It's intelligent, and it does something original. Proof that Hollywood can do this, or have done it, and proof that it can make money, because obviously the original RoboCop was very successful and it led to sequels. So there you have it. So that's RoboCop, my number 11. And I'll just run down the list again before I go. So at number 20 was Blade Runner, The Final Cut. At number 19 was Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters. Number 18, The Man Who Fell to Earth, the Nick Rogue film. Number 17, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Number 16, another number 2, Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Number 15, Joss Whedon's Serenity. Number 14, The Matrix. Number 13, Metropolis. Number 12, the Planet of the Apes trilogy, the modern trilogy. Number 11, RoboCop. So join me on my next video where I'll be doing the top 10 to 1, my top 10 favourite sci-fi movies. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.